Captain Deho stood in the command center of his ship watching the stars outside the big window, and he felt calm like he always did when he was on duty in the outer part of human space, where his job was to watch for trouble and keep Earth safe from anything that might want to hurt his people. And he had been doing this job for 12 years now since he graduated from the military academy on Mars, where they taught him everything about fighting in space and protecting the solar system from aliens who might not understand that humans did not like visitors who came without asking first. The ship he commanded was called the Indomitable, and it was one of the biggest and strongest ships in the human defense fleet, with weapons that could destroy almost anything, and shields that could stop most attacks and sensors that could see very far into space to watch for enemies coming toward human territory. And right now, those sensors were showing him empty space with just stars and asteroids and the usual traffic of human ships moving between Earth and Mars and the mining stations in the asteroid belt, where people worked to get metals and materials that Earth needed. Deho was looking at the reports from his crew when Lieutenant So-Min came up to him with a worried look on her face, and she said, "Captain, we have something strange on the long-range sensors, and it looks like ships coming toward us from the direction of the Vorthak Empire, and they are still very far away. But they are definitely heading for human space, and their course will bring them right to the boundary markers in about 6 hours if they keep going." The same speed, the captain turned to look at the big screen that showed a map of the area around the solar system, and he could see 12 red dots moving slowly but steadily toward the yellow line that marked where human space began and where the warning beacons told everyone in the galaxy that they needed permission before they could come any closer, and those beacons had been there for 50 years, ever since humans first started traveling to other star systems and met other species, who sometimes thought they could just go wherever they wanted without asking. Deho knew about the Vorthak Empire, because every captain in the human defense fleet had to study all the alien species that lived near human space. And the Vorthak were one of the most dangerous because they had conquered 14 different star systems and enslaved the people who lived there, and they had a reputation for attacking anyone they thought was weaker than them and taking their planets and resources and making the survivors work as slaves in their mines and factories. The Vorthak looked like big lizards that walked on 2 legs, and they had sharp teeth and claws and thick scales that could stop bullets, and they were about 8 feet tall and very strong, and they lived for a long time and had technology that was almost as good as human technology, but not quite as advanced, and they had been expanding their empire for the last 100 years by attacking smaller species who could not fight back effectively. So-Min showed Deho the sensor readings, and he could see that the 12 ships were definitely Vorthak warships, because they had the right size and shape and energy signatures, and they were moving in a formation that the Vorthak military used when they were planning to attack something, and Deho felt his stomach get tight because this was exactly the kind of situation that his training had prepared him for, but he had hoped he would never have to face it in real life. The captain walked over to his command chair and sat down and pressed the button that connected him to the communications officer, and he said, "Jiwoo, please send a message to Earth Command and tell them that we have 12 Vorthak warships approaching the boundary, and they are on an attack course, and we are following protocol. One which means we will give them the standard warning and wait for their response before taking any action." Jiwoo was a young woman who had joined the fleet 2 years ago, and she was very good at her job, and she quickly sent the message to Earth. And then she looked up at Deho and said, "Captain, the message has been sent, and Earth Command says they are sending reinforcements, but they will not arrive for at least 4 hours, and they are ordering us to follow standard procedures and defend the boundary at all costs." Deho nodded, and then he pressed another button and spoke to the whole crew over the ship's communication system, and he said, "All hands, this is the captain. We have enemy ships approaching human space, and we are going to yellow alert, which means everyone should go to their battle stations and prepare for possible combat, and remember that we are the guardians of human space, and we will not let anyone pass who does not have permission." The crew moved quickly to their positions, and Deho could hear the sounds of people running through the corridors and the hum of weapons systems powering up and the beep of computers as they switched to combat mode, and he felt proud of his crew because they were all professionals who knew their jobs and would do whatever was necessary to protect Earth and all the human colonies. So-Min came back to the captain and said, "Sir, the Vorthak ships will reach the boundary in 3 hours, and we should send them the warning now, so they have time to turn around if they decide to listen to reason." And Deho said, "Yes, do it now and make sure they understand that we are serious about protecting our space." The lieutenant went to the communications station and worked with Jiwoo to prepare the warning message that was required by human law whenever alien ships approached the boundary, and the message was always the same, and it was recorded in 17 different alien languages so that almost anyone in the galaxy could understand it. And it said, "This is human space, and entry is by invitation only, and you are ordered to turn around immediately and leave, or you will be met with overwhelming force, and this is your only warning." Jiwoo sent the message toward the Vorthak ships, and then they waited to see what would happen, and Deho hoped that the aliens would be smart enough to turn around and go home, because he did not want to have to kill anyone today. But he knew that if the Vorthak kept coming, he would have no choice but to destroy them, because that was his duty and his oath to protect human space from all threats. 30 minutes later, the response came back from the Vorthak ships, and Jiwoo played it on the main speakers, so everyone on the bridge could hear it, and the voice was deep and rough and spoke in the common galactic language that most species used for communication, and it said, "Humans, you are nothing but hairless primitives who got lucky with faster-than-light travel, and we do not fear your empty threats, and we will take your pathetic solar system and enslave your people like we have done to 14 other species, and you cannot stop the might of the Vorthak Empire." Deho felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm and steady when he said, "Jiwoo, send a reply and tell them that they have been warned, and if they cross the boundary, they will be destroyed, and their deaths will serve as a warning to others who might think about entering human space without permission." The communications officer sent the message, and then Deho stood up from his chair and walked over to the tactical station where Sang-ho was monitoring the weapons systems, and he said, "Tactical, prepare all weapons for combat and activate the stealth mines in sectors 7 through 12, and notify all sentinel stations to prepare for engagement, and remember that we need to send a message that will be heard across the galaxy." Sang-ho's fingers moved quickly over his controls, and he said, "Captain, all weapons are ready, and the stealth mines are active, and the sentinel stations are reporting ready status, and we have full coordination with the defense grid." And Deho nodded and said, "Good. Now we wait and see if they are stupid enough to cross the line." 2.5 hours later, the Vorthak ships reached the boundary markers, and they did not slow down or change course. And Somin said, "Captain, they have crossed into human space, and they are now legitimate targets under protocol." Seven and Deho took a deep breath and said, "Very well. Activate Protocol 7, and may God help them, because we will not." The sensors showed the 12 Vorthak ships spreading out into attack formation as they moved deeper into human space, and Deho knew that in a few minutes the aliens would learn why no one entered human space uninvited and lived to tell about it. The Vorthak ships moved deeper into human space like predators who thought they were hunting helpless prey, but they did not know that they had already walked into a trap that had been planned and prepared for 50 years by humans who understood that the best defense was to make attackers regret their decision to come uninvited, and Deho watched his tactical display as the 12 enemy warships split into 3 groups of 4 ships each, which was exactly what the human battle computers had predicted they would do based on years of studying Vorthak military tactics. Communications officer Jiwoo received reports from 3 other human defense fleet ships that were stationed in different parts of the solar system, and she said, "Captain, the Vorthak are dividing their forces with one group heading toward Mars, another group moving toward the asteroid mining stations, and the third group coming straight toward Earth. And Admiral Tae-young on the orbital defense platform says this is a classic Vorthak attack pattern designed to force us to spread our defenses." Thin Deho nodded because he had studied the same tactical manuals, and he knew that the Vorthak thought humans would panic and try to defend everything at once, which would make human forces weak everywhere instead of strong in one place. But the aliens did not understand that humans had learned from every war they had ever fought, and they had built their defenses to turn the enemy's own tactics against them. The captain pressed the communication button that connected him directly to Fleet Admiral Tae-young, who was commanding the response from the massive orbital defense platform that circled Earth like a metal moon, and when the admiral's face appeared on the screen, Deho said, "Sir, the enemy has taken the bait and split their forces exactly as predicted." And Tae-young smiled grimly and said, "Excellent, Captain. Now we show them what happens when someone underestimates human engineering." Tae-young was an older man who had fought in 3 different wars against alien species, who had tried to attack human colonies, and he had learned that the key to winning against superior numbers was to use superior technology and tactics, and he had spent 10 years designing the defense system that was about to be tested for the first time against a real enemy fleet. The Admiral gave the order to begin Phase 1 of the defensive plan, and immediately the space around the Vorthak ships began to fill with small objects that looked like asteroids, but were actually automated hunter-killer drones that had been hidden in the asteroid belt for years, waiting for exactly this kind of situation, and the drones were equipped with advanced stealth technology that made them almost invisible to enemy sensors until it was too late. Lieutenant So-min monitored the tactical display as dozens of the hidden drones emerged from their hiding places among the real asteroids and began moving toward the Vorthak ships like a swarm of deadly insects, and she said, "Captain, the drones are in position and requesting permission to engage targets." And Dae-ho said, "Permission granted, eliminate the scouts first." The first phase of the attack targeted the smaller Vorthak scout ships that were flying ahead of the main warships to watch for human defenses, and the hunter-killer drones moved in perfect coordination, using gravitational fields to accelerate themselves to incredible speeds before striking their targets. With plasma warheads that could burn through any known armor, and within 30 seconds, 6 Vorthak scout ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light that lit up the darkness of space. Admiral Krexthar commanded the Vorthak fleet from his flagship, and he watched in growing alarm as his scouts were destroyed by weapons that seemed to come from nowhere, and he ordered his sensor operators to scan for the source of the attack, but the human drones had already disappeared back into the asteroid field where they blended perfectly with the natural rocks and debris. The Vorthak admiral opened a communication channel to his fleet commanders and said in his harsh reptilian voice, "All ships increase speed and activate maximum shields. These humans have some kind of hidden weapons system, but they cannot have many of these devices, or they would have used them already, so we will push through their defenses and complete our mission." But Krexthar was wrong, because the humans had not shown him their real defenses yet, and Phase 1 was just the beginning of a carefully planned demonstration of human military technology that would teach the Vorthak and anyone else who might be listening that entering human space without permission was the last mistake anyone would ever make. Commander Yu Jin led a squadron of 12 human stealth fighters that had been hiding behind Jupiter's largest moon, waiting for the right moment to strike, and when she received the signal from Admiral Tae-young, she said to her pilots, "All right, people. This is what we trained for. Remember the plan. Use the gravitational slingshot to build up speed and hit them from angles they cannot expect, and make every shot count." Yu Jin was one of the best pilots in the human defense fleet, and she had developed new tactics for using the gravity of planets and moons to achieve attack speeds that were impossible with normal engine power, and her squadron practiced these maneuvers until they could execute them perfectly even under combat conditions. The 12 stealth fighters came around Jupiter at tremendous speed, using the planet's gravity to accelerate them faster than any Vorthak ship could match, and they approached the enemy fleet from below where the aliens would not expect an attack because most space battles happened on the same plane, but humans had learned to think in 3 dimensions. Yujin's fighters struck the rear group of Vorthak ships with surgical precision using plasma torpedoes that had been designed specifically to penetrate Vorthak shields and armor, and the weapons worked exactly as planned, burning through the enemy's defenses, like they were made of paper instead of advanced alien metals. 2 more Vorthak warships exploded, and Admiral Krexthar realized that he had made a terrible mistake in underestimating human capabilities, and he sent an emergency message to the main Vorthak fleet that was waiting outside the solar system saying, "We are under attack by advanced human forces, request immediate reinforcements. Their technology is more sophisticated than our intelligence reported." But the message would take time to reach the main fleet and even more time for reinforcements to arrive, and Krexthar was beginning to understand that he might not live long enough to see help come because the humans were not fighting like the primitive species that the Vorthak had conquered before. Tactical Officer Sang-ho reported to Captain Dae-ho that the enemy ships were trying to regroup and form a defensive formation, but their movements were being tracked by the network of sensor stations that humans had built throughout the solar system. And he said, "Captain, we have complete situational awareness, and the enemy is moving exactly where our battle computers predicted they would go." Deho looked at the tactical display and saw that the Vorthak ships were indeed moving into a position where they would be vulnerable to the next phase of the human defense plan, and he said, "Sang-Ho, signal Admiral Tae-Young that the enemy is in position for Phase 2 and prepare our main weapons for coordinated fire." The second phase of the defense involved the orbital weapons platforms that had been built around Earth and Mars and in the asteroid belt, and these platforms were armed with gravitational beam weapons that could reach across millions of kilometers to strike targets with pinpoint accuracy, and when they fired together, they could create a crossfire pattern that no enemy ship could escape. Admiral Tae-Young coordinated the firing sequence from his command center, and when all platforms reported ready, he said, "All stations, this is Tae-Young, execute Phase 2 now, and show these invaders what human engineering can accomplish when we put our minds to it." The gravitational beam weapons fired simultaneously, creating invisible streams of focused gravity that reached across space at the speed of light and struck the Vorthak ships with forces that no armor could withstand, and 3 more enemy warships were crushed like tin cans, while their crews screamed in terror and disbelief. Engineer Hyun Woo monitored the power systems on Daeho's ship, and he reported that all weapons were operating at peak efficiency, and the ship's shields were ready to deflect any return fire from the surviving Vorthak vessels, and he said, "Captain, our systems are performing perfectly, and we can maintain this level of combat operations for several hours, if necessary," but it was becoming clear that the battle would not last several hours because the Vorthak were discovering that their intelligence about human military capabilities had been completely wrong, and they were facing technology that was years ahead of what they had expected to encounter. The surviving Vorthak ships tried to retreat, but they found that human forces had surrounded them, and every escape route was blocked by ships or weapons platforms or minefields that had been activated. As soon as the aliens crossed into human space and Admiral Krexthar realized that his fleet had not stumbled into a simple border patrol, but had walked into a carefully prepared killing ground, Lieutenant Somin received a priority message from the Deep Space Monitoring Station, and she said, "Captain, we are detecting massive energy signatures from the direction of Vorthak space, and it appears that their main fleet is preparing to move toward our position, and the estimated size is over 300 ships." Engineer Hyun Woo received the activation codes from Admiral Tae-Young, and his fingers moved quickly over the control panel as he brought online the most secret and powerful defensive system that humans had ever built, and the system had been under construction for 20 years, using technology that was so advanced that only a few dozen people in the entire human defense fleet even knew it existed. And now it was time to reveal what human engineering could accomplish when the survival of their species was at stake. The system was called the Solar Defense Grid, and it turned the entire solar system into a single massive weapon by linking together every human-built structure from the smallest mining station to the largest orbital platform and connecting them with gravitational field generators that could focus the power of the sun itself into beams that could destroy anything in space. And the system had been designed by the greatest human scientists working together for decades to create the ultimate protection for Earth. Captain Daeho watched his tactical display as thousands of new contacts appeared, showing weapons platforms and sensor stations and power generators that had been hidden throughout the solar system, disguised as asteroids or space debris or even built into the surfaces of moons and planets, and he realized that what the Vorthak had thought was a lightly defended star system was actually a fortress that could defend itself against any conceivable attack. Hyun Woo reported that all components of the solar defense grid were online and responding to commands, and the system was ready to demonstrate why no alien species had ever successfully invaded human space, and why the warnings on the boundary beacons were not empty threats but promises that would be kept, no matter what the cost. Admiral Krexthar stared at his tactical display in growing horror as hundreds of human weapons revealed themselves all around his fleet, and he realized that his ships had not penetrated human defenses, but had been allowed to enter a carefully prepared trap where they could be destroyed with maximum efficiency and minimum risk to human forces. The Vorthak admiral tried to contact his remaining ships, but discovered that human jamming systems were blocking his communications, and his fleet was being isolated into small groups that could be eliminated one at a time. And he began to understand that the humans had been planning for this exact scenario for many years and had prepared for every possible Vorthak tactic. Lieutenant Minji led a boarding team of 12 human Marines who had trained for years in zero-gravity combat, and they used personal jetpacks to cross the space between Daeho's ship and a damaged Vorthak cruiser that had been disabled by the gravitational beam weapons, and their mission was to capture intelligence about Vorthak plans and capabilities. Minji and her team cut through the hull of the Vorthak ship using plasma torches, and they moved through the alien corridors, fighting past Vorthak soldiers who were disoriented and demoralized by the destruction of most of their fleet, and the Marines used stun weapons to capture prisoners, rather than kill them, because they needed information about what the Vorthak were really planning. The boarding team reached the command center of the Vorthak cruiser, and they found computer systems that contained detailed plans for the invasion of human space. And Minji was shocked to discover that the 12 ships they were fighting were just an advance force sent to test human defenses. And the real Vorthak invasion fleet consisted of over 300 warships that were waiting just outside the solar system. Minji immediately contacted Captain Daeho and reported what she had found, and she said, "Captain, this is not the main attack. This is just a probe to see how we defend ourselves, and there is a massive fleet waiting to attack. Once they think we have used up our weapons and defenses fighting these 12 ships." Daeho felt his blood turn cold because 300 Vorthak warships was enough to conquer most star systems, and even with all of human technology and preparation, it would be a difficult battle. But then he realized that this situation represented an opportunity to send a message that would be heard throughout the galaxy. The captain contacted Admiral Tae-young and said, "Sir, we have intelligence that this is just the advance force, and the main Vorthak fleet is 300 ships waiting outside our system, and I request permission to implement the final journey protocol and make sure that every alien in the galaxy understands what happens to uninvited guests." Admiral Tae-young was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Captain, are you certain that you want to take this step? Because once we implement final journey, there will be no going back, and every species in the galaxy will know exactly what human military technology can accomplish." Daeho looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew, and he saw determination and resolve and the knowledge that they were fighting not just for their own lives, but for the future of humanity, and he said, "Admiral, I am certain, and my crew is ready, and it is time to show the galaxy that humans will defend their space with overwhelming force." Tae-young gave his approval, and Hyun-woo began the activation sequence for the final journey protocol, which would use the full power of the solar defense grid not just to destroy the Vorthak ships in human space, but to reach out beyond the boundary and eliminate the waiting invasion fleet before it could retreat, to spread word of human capabilities. Protocol required the coordination of every human military asset in the solar system, and it would consume enormous amounts of power and resources, but it would demonstrate human technological superiority in a way that no alien species could ignore or forget, and the message would spread throughout the galaxy that humans were not to be challenged. Lieutenant So-min monitored the charging sequence of the solar defense grid as power from fusion reactors and solar collectors and antimatter generators flowed into the gravitational field projectors, and she reported that the system would be ready to fire in 15 minutes, and the targeting computers were calculating the exact positions of all enemy ships, both inside and outside human space communications. Officer Ji-woo intercepted Vorthak military transmissions, and she discovered that Admiral Krexthar was sending desperate messages to his main fleet, telling them that human defenses were far stronger than expected and recommending that they retreat immediately rather than proceed with the invasion. But the commander of the main Vorthak fleet responded that retreat was not acceptable, and that Krexthar was probably exaggerating the human threat because it was impossible for a single star system to have enough military power to stop 300 warships, and the invasion would proceed as planned once the advance force finished testing human capabilities. Yu-jin's fighter squadron had regrouped and was preparing for another attack run when she received orders to fall back to minimum safe distance because the solar defense grid was about to demonstrate its full power, and she said to her pilots, "All fighters withdraw to safe distance." and prepare to witness something that has never been seen before in the history of space warfare. The remaining Vorthak ships in human space tried desperately to escape, but they found that human forces had created an invisible cage of gravitational fields around them, and every time they tried to change course, they were pushed back toward the center of the trap, where the solar defense grid would focus its power. Tactical Officer Sang Ho reported that all targeting solutions were locked, and the solar defense grid was ready to fire. And he said, "Captain, we have firing solutions on all enemy ships, both in human space and in the staging area outside our boundary, and we are ready to execute final journey on your command." Hyun Woo announced that all power systems were at maximum output, and the gravitational field projectors were aligned and charged. And he said, "Captain, the solar defense grid is operating at 100% efficiency, and we can maintain maximum power for 30 minutes, which should be more than enough." Time to complete the mission. Captain Daeho stood up from his command chair and looked around at his bridge crew, and he said, "Today we defend not just our space but our right to exist as a free species, and we will show the galaxy that humans cannot be conquered or intimidated or destroyed by any force, and future generations will remember this day as the moment when humanity took its place among the great powers of the galaxy." The captain pressed the firing button, and the solar defense grid activated with a power that had never been unleashed in space before, and gravitational beams reached out across millions of kilometers to touch every Vorthak ship simultaneously, and the aliens discovered too late that they had challenged a species that had spent centuries learning how to turn the forces of nature itself into weapons of war. The space around the solar system lit up with explosions as Vorthak warships were torn apart by gravitational forces that crushed their hulls and scattered their atoms across the emptiness, and Admiral Krexthar had just enough time to realize that his species had made the greatest military mistake in galactic history before his flagship was reduced to glowing particles drifting in space. Tactical Officer Sang Ho monitored the sensor readings as the gravitational beams from the solar defense grid reached beyond human space and struck the Vorthak main fleet that had been waiting in what they thought was a safe staging area, and his instruments showed 312 alien warships being simultaneously destroyed in the largest single military action in galactic history, and he said, "Captain, all enemy targets have been eliminated and there are no Vorthak survivors in our sensor range." Captain Daeho felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness because he took no pleasure in killing, but he knew that the destruction of the Vorthak fleet would save countless lives by discouraging other species from attempting similar invasions. And he said, "Sang Ho, begin recording all sensor data and communication intercepts, because we need to document exactly what happened here for the historical record." The gravitational weapons had reached across space faster than any Vorthak ship could escape, and the alien fleet had been caught completely by surprise because their intelligence had told them that human weapons had limited range, and they had positioned themselves at what they believed was a safe distance. But human technology had advanced far beyond what any alien species had imagined possible. Communications Officer Ji Woo worked with her team to compile a complete record of the battle, including tactical sensor readings and recordings of Vorthak communications and the final transmissions from Admiral Krexthar's flagship as it was destroyed, and she said, "Captain, we have captured detailed records of the entire engagement, and the data shows exactly how the Vorthak fleet was eliminated." Daeho knew that this information would be valuable not just for military analysis, but for sending a message to the rest of the galaxy, and he said, "Ji Woo, prepare a transmission package that includes the tactical recordings and transmit it on all galactic communication frequencies with a simple message from humanity to anyone who might be listening." The message that Ji Woo prepared was direct and clear, and it said, "This is a recording of what happens when alien forces enter human space without permission. And the Vorthak Empire sent 324 warships to invade our solar system, and all of these ships have been destroyed, and their crews are dead, and this is what will happen to any other species that attempts to violate human sovereignty." The transmission included complete sensor recordings showing the Vorthak ships being destroyed by weapons that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and the recordings made it clear that the human defense system was not limited to a few ships or weapons platforms, but encompassed the entire solar system and could strike any target within millions of kilometers with devastating effect. Within hours, the transmission was picked up by monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, and news networks began broadcasting the story of how the mighty Vorthak Empire had lost its entire invasion fleet to a human defense system that had eliminated over 300 warships in less than 30 minutes. Admiral Tae-young contacted Dae-ho from his command center on the orbital defense platform, and he said, "Captain, the elimination of the Vorthak fleet has been confirmed by our deep space sensors, and there are no surviving enemy ships in this sector, and I want to commend you and your crew for the professional manner in which you handled this situation." But Tae-young also warned that the destruction of the Vorthak fleet would have political consequences throughout the galaxy, and he said, "Captain, we need to be prepared for the possibility that other species may decide to test our defenses or attempt to form alliances against us, because we have just demonstrated that humans possess military technology that is superior to anything else in known space." Dae-ho understood the implications, and he said, "Admiral, I recommend that we send follow-up messages to the major galactic powers, making it clear that humans have no aggressive intentions but will respond with overwhelming force to any threat against our territory or our people, and we should also offer to establish diplomatic relations with any species that wants to trade or cooperate peacefully." Lieutenant Minji returned from her boarding mission with intelligence data that had been captured from the Vorthak computers, and she reported that the aliens had been planning their invasion for 2 years and had believed that human technology was primitive and that a surprise attack would quickly overwhelm Earth's defenses. The Vorthak intelligence reports showed that they had seriously underestimated human military capabilities and had based their invasion plans on outdated information from decades ago when humans first began exploring space, and the aliens had not realized how rapidly human technology had advanced or how thoroughly humans had prepared their defenses. Minji also discovered that the Vorthak had been broadcasting their invasion live to potential allies throughout the galaxy as a demonstration of their military power and their ability to conquer advanced civilizations, but instead of showing Vorthak's strength, the broadcast had shown the complete destruction of their fleet by human weapons. The live broadcast meant that billions of beings across dozens of different species had watched the Vorthak fleet being eliminated, and the psychological impact of seeing such a powerful military force destroyed so quickly and completely would reshape galactic politics and military thinking for generations to come. Engineer Hyun-woo reported that the solar defense grid had performed flawlessly during its first combat test, and all systems had operated within normal parameters despite the enormous power requirements, and he said, "Captain, the grid can be recharged and ready for operation again within 6 hours if we need to defend against another attack." But Sang-ho's sensors showed that there were no other alien fleets approaching human space, and in fact, several species that had been moving ships toward the human boundary had suddenly changed course and were heading away from the solar system as fast as their engines could carry them. The news of the Vorthak defeat spread rapidly through galactic communication networks, and within 24 hours, it was the main story on every news service in known space, with military analysts and political commentators trying to understand how humans had developed such advanced weapons technology without anyone in the galactic intelligence community knowing about it. Some alien species began demanding that the Galactic Council investigate human military capabilities and determine whether humans posed a threat to galactic peace, but other species pointed out that humans had only acted in self-defense against an unprovoked invasion and had every right to protect their territory from aggressive neighbors. 3 different alien governments that had been secretly planning their own invasions of human space immediately canceled their military preparations and began drafting diplomatic messages requesting peaceful contact with Earth because they had no desire to face the same fate as the Vorthak Empire. Commander Yu Jin led her fighter squadron on patrol missions throughout the solar system to ensure that there were no surviving Vorthak ships or hidden installations, and her pilots reported that space around Earth was completely clear of enemy forces and that human territory was secure. The patrol missions also served as a demonstration of human military readiness, because alien intelligence services were undoubtedly monitoring human activities, and Yujin wanted to make sure that anyone watching understood that the destruction of the Vorthak fleet had not depleted human defenses or left Earth vulnerable to attack communication intercepts showed that alien governments were holding emergency meetings to discuss the implications of human military superiority, and some species were proposing new defense alliances, while others were suggesting that it might be wise to seek human protection against aggressive neighbors. Lieutenant So-min analyzed the political intelligence, and she reported that the galactic balance of power had shifted dramatically overnight and humans were now recognized as the dominant military force in their region of space, which would create both opportunities and challenges for future diplomacy. Captain Daeho realized that humanity had crossed a threshold and could never go back to being seen as a minor species on the edges of galactic civilization, and he said to his crew, "Today we have defended our home, but we have also changed our place in the galaxy forever, and we must be ready for whatever comes next." 6 months after the destruction of the Vorthak invasion fleet, Captain Daeho stood in the newly constructed Memorial Hall on Luna, where the names of every human who had died defending their species from alien aggression were carved into walls, made of quantum crystal that would last forever, and he felt the weight of responsibility that came with being part of the military force that had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The memorial honored not just those who died in the Vorthak battle, but all the humans who had given their lives over the past century to establish and defend the boundaries of human space, and Daeho read the names of pilots and soldiers and engineers who had sacrificed everything to ensure that humanity would remain free and independent in a galaxy full of species that often settled their differences through violence. Ambassador Yun Seo had returned from the Galactic Council chambers on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, where she had spent the last 6 months dealing with the political aftermath of humanity's demonstration of military superiority, and she reported that the galaxy had been transformed by the knowledge that humans possessed weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. In minutes, the ambassador told Daeho that 43 different species had submitted formal requests for defensive alliances with humanity, and these were not the major galactic powers, but smaller civilizations that lived in fear of aggressive neighbors like the Vorthak Empire, and they wanted human protection in exchange for trade agreements and scientific cooperation. Yun Seo explained that the galactic political structure had been based on the assumption that no single species possessed overwhelming military superiority, but the solar defense grid had shattered that assumption and created a new reality where humans were recognized as the apex defensive force in their region of space. Some alien governments had initially demanded that humans share their advanced weapons technology or submit to international inspections to ensure that human weapons would not be used for conquest. But these demands had been quietly dropped when it became clear that humans had no interest in expanding their territory and would respond to threats with the same overwhelming force they had used against the Vorthak Admiral. Tae Young had been promoted to Supreme Fleet Admiral and given command of all human military forces, and he had overseen the construction of new defensive installations throughout the solar system and the development of even more advanced weapons technology that would ensure human superiority for generations to come. Tae Young understood that military strength, without diplomatic wisdom, could lead to isolation and conflict, so he had worked closely with Ambassador Yun Seo to establish policies that would allow humans to use their power responsibly and build positive relationships with alien species that approach them with respect and peaceful intentions. The ironies were not lost on human leaders that their fierce protection of their isolation had made them the most sought-after allies in the galaxy, and dozens of species were requesting permission to establish trade routes through human space, because they knew that any ship traveling under human protection would be safe from pirates and raiders. Lieutenant So-min had been promoted to commander and given responsibility for coordinating human responses to the flood of diplomatic and commercial requests that arrived daily from alien governments and corporations, and she had developed new protocols for evaluating which species deserved human friendship and which ones were simply trying to exploit human military power for their own gain. The evaluation process was thorough and included extensive background checks on alien governments and their treatment of other species and their history of honoring agreements and their commitment to peaceful coexistence, and only those who met strict standards were granted access to human space and the protection that came with it. Commander Yu Jin now led the expanded fighter wing that patrolled the outer boundaries of human space and her. Pilots regularly encountered alien ships that had come to test human resolve or simply to see the legendary defenses that had destroyed the Vorthak fleet, and she made sure that every encounter reinforced the message that humans were both powerful and reasonable. The patrol missions served multiple purposes beyond simple defense, because they demonstrated human military readiness to anyone who might be watching, and they provided opportunities for positive contact with alien species that approached. Human space with proper authorization and peaceful intentions, engineer Hyun Woo had been assigned to lead the team developing next-generation defensive technologies, and his work focused on creating systems that would be even more effective than the solar defense grid while consuming less energy and requiring fewer resources to maintain. The new technologies included quantum field manipulators that could disable enemy ships without destroying them, and temporal distortion generators that could slow down incoming attacks to give human forces more time to respond, and gravitational lenses that could focus the energy of entire stars into precise weapons. Beam's communications officer Ji Woo had become the chief of interspecies communications, and she managed the complex task of maintaining diplomatic contact with dozens of alien governments while also monitoring potential threats and coordinating the information sharing that was essential to galactic peace and stability. One of Ji Woo's most important responsibilities was managing the public relations aspect of human military power, because the galaxy needed to understand that humans use their strength to protect rather than to conquer, and that human weapons were defensive tools, rather than instruments of aggression. The Galactic Council had established new protocols for interspecies relations that recognized human sovereignty and military superiority, while also creating mechanisms for peaceful dispute resolution and cooperative security arrangements, and these protocols were largely based on the human model of defensive deterrence. Captain Dae-ho received a priority message from the outer sensor grid, and Lieutenant Min Ji reported that a new alien contact was requesting permission to enter human space, and the message included detailed information about their species and their reasons for seeking contact with humanity. The new contact identified themselves as representatives of the Zalani Collective, and their message was remarkable for its careful attention to human protocols and its respectful tone and its clear understanding of the consequences of approaching human space without proper authorization. The Zalani message included a complete history of their civilization and their current political and military situation and their reasons for seeking an alliance with humanity and their proposals for mutual cooperation in trade and scientific research and their commitment to respecting human sovereignty and territorial integrity. Minji analyzed the Zalani proposal and reported that their credentials appeared legitimate, and their government had a reputation for honoring agreements and treating other species fairly, and their technology was advanced enough to be useful to humans, but not so advanced as to represent a potential threat. Dae-ho reviewed the proposal carefully and consulted with Admiral Tae-young and Ambassador Yoon Seo, and they agreed that the Zalani represented exactly the kind of species that humans wanted as allies and friends and partners in building a more peaceful and stable galaxy. The captain authorized the Zalani approach, and their ships were escorted into human space by Yu Jin's fighters, and the aliens were given a complete tour of human facilities and technology as a demonstration of both human capabilities and human willingness to share knowledge with trusted allies. The Zalani representatives were amazed by the scope and sophistication of human defenses, and they understood immediately why the Vorthak fleet had been destroyed so quickly and completely, and they expressed gratitude for the opportunity to establish peaceful relations with such a powerful civilization. 6 months later, the Zalani Alliance had become a model for human relationships with other species, and it demonstrated that humans could be generous and supportive allies to those who approached them with respect and honesty, while remaining absolutely ruthless to those who chose aggression and invasion. Dae-ho stood on the observation deck of his ship, watching the traffic moving peacefully through human space, and he saw Zalani cargo ships carrying goods to Earth and human patrol craft escorting alien vessels through dangerous areas and diplomatic shuttles carrying ambassadors to important meetings. The captain reflected on how humanity's unwavering commitment to defending their territory had created something unprecedented in galactic history, which was a civilization that no one dared to attack, but everyone wanted as a friend and ally and protector. The boundary warning beacons had been updated with new statistics that reflected the changed reality of galactic politics, and the message now read, "Entry by invitation. Only and 847 species comply, and 12 learn the hard way and choose wisely because humanity protects its friends and destroys its enemies." Captain Deho smiled as he read the updated warning because it perfectly captured the new galactic order where human space was respected not because of laws or treaties, but because of the genuine fear of consequences and the hope of friendship and protection that came with earning human trust and alliance.